Hi, welcome. This is the 17th edition of the MOMENTA Biennale de l'Image, titled Sensing Nature. I'm Stefanie Hessler, and I am the curator of this year's edition of the Biennale, in collaboration with Camille Georgeson-Usher, Himali Singh Soin, and Maude Johnson. The theme of the 17th MOMENTA Biennale de l'Image is Sensing Nature, and the title is considered in two ways. So on the one hand, humans sensing nature, and on the other hand, nature sensing back. And with the exhibitions, we consider nature as an active entity with its own agency and its own legal rights. The focus on sensing is really important to us to offer alternatives to the European Enlightenment focus on rational and cognitive knowledge, and to highlight embodied knowledge. So knowledge that we have on the one hand, of course, through the optical or through vision, but on the other hand, also through the tactile, through the auditory, through taste, and through smell. And so in the exhibition, the artists offer various takes on how we can make knowledge of the world and build different kinds of relation with nature that are more caring and that are based in embodiment or in experiments of understanding our relationship with nature differently. We also look at nature together with culture, so we consider those two entities to be really one and to be complicated relationships. We're here inside the exhibition Rivers Flowing Through Bodies at Occurrence, and it's a double exhibition by Townie and Fun and by P. Staff and Candice Lynn. And the exhibition looks at the ways that the material and spiritual connections of bodies and belief systems and also environmental impact are connected. The exhibitions also look at toxicity and pollution. And in the case of Candice Lynn and P. Staff, also at the hormones in plants and in human bodies. So questioning sort of also the binary of gender and other binaries. We can see here tubes emitting fog every few minutes, herbs and different tinctures that are being prepared, almost like in a laboratory. And the exhibition is looking into also the history of colonialism and how colonial imperialist relations have eradicated the knowledge of healers, witches, shamans, and so on, and have imposed a certain way of viewing the world and a certain way of treating plants, not so much as medicine, but as a sort of outside other. There are different texts as well, carved into these plexiglasses, telling the history, for instance, here about colonialists arriving in a certain area and the encounter between indigenous populations and the violence that has occurred during these encounters. Then there's some paintings telling the history, partly also of the Silk Road, which was one of the first sort of large travel and trade routes between East and West. We're here inside the film Becoming Alluvium by Townie and Fun. Tao has been doing research at the Mekong River and into the different stories and legends that have emerged from the river and affected also the livelihoods of people living on the river banks. Here, for instance, we see an animation describing the story of a princess who wishes the most beautiful jewelry ever made from morning dew on the rice by the river, and it's a moral tale of what we wish for and what we can actually achieve. And the film is also about pollution and extraction and all of the things that humans have been doing on this river for a very long time, but also the relations that the river sustains. And together with the film, we're showing a series of drawings. And these drawings also appear in the animation, so they're sort of the different elements from which the animation has been composed. We're here at Diagonal inside the exhibition by Leoli Eshraghi called The End is Where We Start From. The exhibition consists in neon signs and an installation as well as a video. And with the installation, Leoli proposes indige-queer defiance to the binary systems and religious and sexual violence that has been introduced by Western religions in the Pacific and on islands such as Samoa, where some of Leoli's ancestors come from. We see neon signs in French and also in Samoan back here. The sentence we see here on the wall roughly translates to the ancestors' words in eternity. And together with the neon sign, we see a ceremonial space dedicated to Fa, the Samoan god of war, which is an octopus. And on these fabrics, we see both ancestral and contemporary symbols printed and creating this sort of gathering space. And the video in the back celebrates indigenous and non-binary pleasure and affect, and kinships between both humans and non-humans, and forms of relation that have otherwise been eradicated by what Leoli refers to as Gregorian shame time. So both the linear time frames that have been introduced by Western philosophies, and also the shame that comes with Christianity and religion. And instead, Leoli proposes that fa'afine, or non-binary forms of pleasure and intimacy, both with land, with light, with air, and with all sorts of other beings, both imaginary and real, can really be a proposal for more caring and better relations. Here at Centre Clark, we're inside the exhibition by New Red Order, The Last of the Lémuriens. New Red Order is a collective consisting of Adam Khalil, Zach Khalil, Kite, and Jackson Polis. And together, the artists have explored the fake myth that there was once a supercontinent that stretched all the way from the coast of East Africa through the Indian Ocean and to the Pacific. And proponents of the supposed supercontinent were developing this fake theory in order to claim that they, well, settlers in most cases, were, so to speak, the first indigenous peoples and the most indigenous and original people to the supercontinent. And these theories have been proposed by theosophists, including Helena Blavatsky in the 19th century. And her theory of root races is essentially a racist, white supremacist construct. And so both humorously and critically, New Red Order undo this myth. And here we see a video, for instance, filmed in a cave where supposedly the entrance to the Lemurian origins is found. We see a crystal, references to lava, both material that can be destructive but also bearers and sustainers of life. We see different objects like this one here referring to the myths of reptilians and the way that reptilianism is often used in politics, especially right-wing populist politics. We also see these rocks that are in the shape of eggs and could potentially refer to the origins of Lemurians. And so with the exhibition, New Red Order both uncover the implicit racism in the Lemurian claims and humorously undo them and show the absurdity of these claims. We're here inside the exhibition Diffracting of Land and of Light by Bush Gallery. Bush Gallery is a collective of Tanya Willard, Peter Morin, and Gabrielle Lerondelle Hill. The gallery can grow and shrink, and it's an itinerant activist space that started on the land of Tanya Willard, but has also taken place in other parts of the country. And Bush Gallery have a manifesto here in the space where they explain what the gallery is about. It's an indigenous autonomous space. It works with the land and considers walking and working the land as art. It also says that it considers watching movies with trees art, and it really questions and criticizes the racism that still exists in the contemporary art system. For MOMENTA, we invited Bush Gallery to develop a carte blanche exhibition. And what we see here are all works developed this summer on the land, mostly with solar printing. So, for example, these pieces here have been solar printed on parts of a tent that was blown away during a storm. It's a collective exhibition, and it was made entirely by Bush Gallery. And during the preparation of the Biennale, Tanya Willard and Peter Moran were here, and they also did a workshop with people, which was fantastic, where they taught, different ways of printmaking and discussed different issues that Bush Gallery usually addresses together with participants. Inside these bags, there are dried pieces of sage, so they also emit a smell and connect to when the objects were made. We see here a piece of garment that has sometimes been used in performances, as well as documentation of how the prints that we saw in the previous room were made, so these solar prints being washed. So the process of how the exhibition came into being is also present here within the show. What we can see here on this garment, aesthetic disobedience and a call to action for a truth and reconciliation tribunal. And in all of these garments, we can also see photographs and pieces of the land together with animal hides, and also the impression of the sunlight directly onto the pieces of cloth. So sort of the direct impression of the land that is being brought into the gallery space here. Here we're at the Galerie de Lucam, where the exhibition De la Terre, of the land, takes place, with artists exploring our complex relationship with land. So both extraction and mining in indigenous territories, but also the relationship between land and ocean. We don't consider them apart, but really as one. And we also have works that focus on uranium mining and the impacts, even many decades after the mines are closed, on humans and non-humans and the land and livelihoods that the land sustains. Here we're under the work of Carolina Caicedo. It's one of her water portraits, and with the water portraits, Carolina creates a different landscape painting, in a way, a portrait of a landscape, which is centered in the middle and then mirrored on both sides. And these photographs that are altered digitally also refer to shamanic visions of various people that she's been working with. And what I find fascinating about these works is that they really undo the European art historical landscape format, which has a very specific dimension, and she elongates it, and she really immerses us in the works. And these works in her performances are also used, so people wear them and they submerge them in water, so they're really active portraits that implicate humans in nature. The work we see here is by Thema Igaras and Aaron Sedal. It's a new commission for the MOMENTA Biennale that we did together with the Toronto Biennial. And Aaron and Thema visited the Great Bear Lake in 2019 and did research at the site where uranium was extracted to build atomic bombs in the 1930s during the Manhattan Project for World War II. And Thema and Aaron interviewed Dene communities living on the shores of the lake, many of whom were employed during the extraction for this project. And Thema and Aaron filmed and they recorded sounds, some of which we can hear here, and took photographs, and also took some of the rocks from the lake with them, which we can see here. They're encased in these glass bubbles that both protect the rocks. It's sort of a museological display, but they also protect us from the very low radioactivity that is present in the rocks. And here on the back we see two photographs on fabric. One of them hung over a sign that looks like government signs telling people about the contamination in the area. And the other one is in the shape of a monument perhaps to the history of extraction and the impact of state power on indigenous communities. Here we see the work of Camille Georgeson-Usher, who is an artist, poet, filmmaker from Mauritius, living here in Tiohtià:ke, Munyang, Montreal. And Camille has a project called Queering the Island Body, where they look at non-binary genders called Zom Femme, man, woman, in Mauritian Creole. And this is a series in the format of postcards, playing with the exoticization of islands and of gendered and racialized bodies. Camille's work continues here. Camille used salt and combined it with pigments to create these sort of island shapes. We're talking to the archipelagic thinking of Edouard Glissant, but also to other ways of thinking about islands as not small specks of land, but actually large entities with their own epistemologies and ways of thinking. Camille is a poet too, so we can see poetry here on the textiles. And on the floor, there's a video dealing with salt and also projected on salt. In Mauritius, there was traditionally a salt manufactory tradition. And we see here Camille interacting with the salt. And salt is an element that can both become liquid and crystallize. So it's a symbol of fluidity. It's also found in the ocean as well as in our bodies. I'm standing here in front of Taloy Havini's work. Taloy is an artist from Bougainville in Papua New Guinea, and the work is looking at the history of extraction and mining, ongoing, I should say, history of mining and extraction in Bougainville, and especially at one mine, which was active for 17 years, where copper was mined and which is now abandoned. And we follow a character, Agatha, as she's looking for gold in the abandoned mines in these devastated ecosystems. And over the videos, we can see every now and then a map superimposed over the images, which shows the land claims and the mining areas. So it's really about how the extractivist grid is imposed onto land and the ecological and social effects of mining. This is another new commission for MOMENTA by the artist Eve Tagny. Eve has been researching the rose and the term English rose, which refers to a fair-skinned, beautiful woman. And she's revisiting these terms and the imperialist and also colonialist histories in both these terms and in gardens. So she really doesn't consider the garden as a secular retreat, but looks at the power mechanisms and mechanisms of control in gardens. So one of the aspects of the English rose is also the way it is grown and where it comes from, mostly in where we get our roses in the global north, which is Ecuador and Kenya. And then there are videos here of people performing different movements referring to the kind of sculptures that we find in classical gardens and gestures of labor. So it's really addressing all of these invisibilized relationships that make possible the rose trade in the past and today that we often don't think about. We're here inside the work of Himali Singh Soin, who has been focusing on a tiny plant which has a very bright pink flower, and it only blooms one day a year for 24 hours. And the plant emits a scent that cannot be detected by the human nose. But Miriam worked together with a company, International Flavors and Fragrances, to collect and synthesize the smells, and she altered them so that they're actually detectable for our human noses, and the scent is distributed here in the gallery. And to me, smell is really interesting because it's registered in the same part of our bodies, of our brains, where memory and emotions are processed. So it's a very sort of direct way of accessing information, but we have very little language to speak about smell directly. So often when we think of smell, we actually use terms that we otherwise use to describe taste. This plant is interesting too because due to a classification error, it's a legal fiction. And in 1987, it was declared as on the verge of extinction and as an endangered species. So to me, this work is really poetry about this tiny plant that's on the verge of extinction and celebrating this plant not for the sake of any usage, but simply because of the plant's sake itself. We've visited some of the exhibitions together as part of MOMENTA. There are many more exhibitions that together propose very plurivocal, very polyphonic takes on what sensing nature might mean. I hope that you will be able to experience the very sensuous and sensory offerings that the artists make, and to really engage and dive into these worlds that are being proposed, from land to water to air, as well as material and spiritual entities, ancestral forms of knowing combined with technological futures, and how we can really think and feel from all of these different perspectives more just and more caring futures.